Close your eyes and take a sip. You probably think you know exactly which drink is which, right? You believe your taste buds are the ones in charge, rationally telling your brain exactly what you like. But actually, you're wrong. You see, for over a century, a silent war has been waged not in grocery store aisles, but directly inside your head. It's a war that has literally manipulated culture, influenced global economies, and exposed the hidden, entirely irrational flaws in human psychology. So how exactly could a simple glass of sugar water hijack the human mind so completely?
Welcome to MarketMindLab. I'm your host, and in today's Explainer, we're investigating the psychology behind the absolute fiercest corporate battle in history. Let's dive right into this because this isn't just some simple business story about two sodas. No, it's an investigation into why incredibly smart executives make catastrophic mistakes, what we actually believe when we buy a product, and how, in the billion-dollar battle for your mind, your brain has essentially been losing.
Act 1. The Unstoppable Empire. To really grasp the sheer scale of this psychological warfare, we have to first look at an empire that seemed completely invincible. This war started quietly, in pharmacies. John Pemberton created Coca-Cola back in 1886. Caleb Bradham followed up with Pepsi-Cola in 1893. But early on, Coke was the absolute, undisputed king. They were so incredibly dominant that they didn't just sell a drink, they patented a glass bottle so distinct you could recognize it in the dark. By the 1930s, they literally defined how the modern world visualizes Santa Claus. They weren't just a beverage company anymore, they were the architects of global human culture.
Now, while Coke was busy shaping Americana, Pepsi was struggling just to survive. Actually, they went bankrupt twice. In their absolute desperation, they went to Coca-Cola and offered to sell the company to them, not just once, but twice. And both times, Coca-Cola just looked down from their throne and completely declined the offer. They didn't view Pepsi as a threat at all. They just assumed their dominance was eternal. As we'll see, that was a decision that would change business history forever.
Act 2. The Critical Decision. By the 1970s, the peace was officially over. Pepsi realized they couldn't beat Coke's cultural history, so they launched a direct psychological attack on the dominant empire. They called it the Pepsi Challenge, starting in a Dallas mall. They used a brilliantly simple setup: 2 unmarked cups, one labeled M, the other labeled Q. They just asked random shoppers to take a blind sip and pick their favorite. The result? A total marketing earthquake. 57% of people blindly chose Pepsi over Coke. The numbers were undeniable, and the public was completely shocked.
As you can imagine, this caused absolute terror inside Coca-Cola's boardroom. Their leadership watched in pure horror as their historical market share, which had once towered at a massive peak of 60%, plummeted down to under 24%. The executives panicked. They looked at Pepsi's data and they believed it. They assumed that the product with the best physical taste just inherently wins the market. But they were ignoring an absolutely crucial psychological flaw in the testing.
That hidden flaw is what behavioral scientists call the sip test bias. You see, our human neurology is wired in a way where our tongue reacts instantly and really favorably to higher sweetness in a single short sip. And because Pepsi has a sweeter flavor profile, well, in a quick sip, sweetness wins. But interestingly, over the course of an entire can, consumers actually prefer Coke's less sugary profile. Coca-Cola's executives completely misunderstood the science of this bias. They just looked at the scary numbers, felt the fear, and made a fateful choice.
And that fear led to this staggering moment. On April 23, 1985, under a top-secret initiative called Project Kansas, Coca-Cola committed corporate heresy. They killed their 99-year-old original formula. They completely replaced it with new Coke, which was a sweeter version explicitly designed to beat Pepsi in those blind taste tests. They trusted the data. They genuinely thought they were simply fixing a flavor problem.
Act 3. The Hidden Psychology.
So why did this seemingly logical, data-driven decision result in the biggest marketing disaster in history? Well, years later, researchers actually put people into MRI machines to see what was happening inside the brain during these exact tests. In a blind test, the brain's pleasure center lit up, and Pepsi won. But the moment they showed the participants the brand labels before they drank, everything changed. The brain's activity literally shifted away from the pleasure center. Instead, the medial prefrontal cortex lit up, and that is the exact region of the brain that processes identity and memory. In that branded test, Coca-Cola dominated.
As the researchers discovered, and this is wild, the brain literally stopped tasting the drink. It's a terrifying and profound realization when you think about it. When people drank Coke from a branded can, they were no longer tasting a physical liquid. Neurologically speaking, they were tasting the iconic red trucks, the Christmas polar bears, and their own childhood memories. The brand identity completely overrode the physical sensation of the liquid. Coca-Cola was never just a soda. It was a literal piece of the consumer's self-identity. And Coca-Cola's executives had just killed it.
Act 4. The disastrous consequences.
When you mess with human identity on that scale, the backlash is going to be unprecedented. People reacted not as unhappy consumers, but as mourners. Actual protests erupted across America. Coca-Cola's headquarters was flooded with 40,000 angry letters. The public reaction wasn't about the physical taste of the new soda. People were acting like there had been a literal death in their family.
The sense of personal betrayal was so intense, so visceral, that consumers resorted to furious name-calling. One letter famously referred to the CEO of Coca-Cola as Chief Dodo. People truly felt that their history, their Americana, their very own memories had been stolen from them by a bunch of out-of-touch executives relying on blind data.
The cultural pressure was, frankly, entirely unsustainable. New Coke lasted an incredibly short 79 days. The company had to wave the white flag, retire New Coke, and bring back the original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic. And the moment they did, sales absolutely skyrocketed. The immediate panic was over, for sure, but the war had permanently escalated.
And that escalation drove both companies to some surreal lengths to control global perception. Pepsi decided to ignore the science and lean heavily into culture, signing Michael Jackson for a record $5 million and unintentionally turning a massive pyrotechnics disaster into the year's most watched commercial. Meanwhile, the geopolitics became completely absurd. In 1989, the Soviet Union literally paid Pepsi in submarines, which briefly gave them the 6th largest navy in the entire world. And Coke? They completely abandoned the massive market of India for 16 years, just to keep their secret formula hidden.
Act 5. The billion-dollar lesson.
So after decades of this psychological warfare, how did the dust settle? Well, Coke won the heart. They finally realized they were selling happiness, not just a beverage. And today, they remain the undisputed king of the beverage world with a 50% global market share. But Pepsi? Pepsi realized a profound truth. They simply couldn't defeat Coke in the identity center of the human brain. So they quietly pivoted and decided to buy up your entire shopping cart. By acquiring Frito-Lay, Gatorade, and Quaker Oats, PepsiCo is now twice as large in total revenue. Coke won the heart, but Pepsi won the pantry. Which brings us to the core psychological takeaway. And honestly, it's a lesson about you and me. Brands don't just sell products, they sell perception. The cola wars absolutely prove that human beings are not entirely rational actors. When you choose a brand, you are actually choosing a version of yourself. Are you the classic icon? Are you the new generation? Your brain has been systematically trained for over a century to make this choice, and the decision was made long before you even stepped foot into the store.
We like to think we have total free choice, but our decisions are clouded by memory, emotion, and identity. So the next time you find yourself reaching for a red or a blue can, I want you to stop for a second and ask yourself, are you actually tasting the drink, or are you just tasting the marketing?